Voyage of Coyote 109, written and performed by Postman. Thomas helplessly floats, left to the mercy of the incomprehensible magnitude of space. He watches in paralyzing horror as his former spacefaring vessel shrinks smaller and smaller in the distance until it is engulfed by the unforgiving, infinite deepest reaches of the oily black universe. The vessel is gone, as if it never existed in the first place. Thomas is more alone now than anyone who has ever lived. There isn't even enough light for him to see his own reflection in his helmet. His only company is the sound of his own rapidly intensifying heartbeat, blasting through his entire body like a war drum signaling his impending doom. Months ago, Thomas and his crewmate Waylon were personally selected to be the ones who would save the entire human race from certain self-destruction. Out of thousands of applicants, these two were meant to be the best and brightest in the world, because our survival was in their hands. Years of research and trillions of dollars were put behind this mission, and time was not on our side. Experts predicted our Earth would only sustain life for 50 more years before overpopulation, violence, disease, war, pollution, and scarcity decreased the birth rate to levels far below the death rate. Once that time is up, only 50 more years remain until the world's population would be reduced to small pockets of disorganized tribes, which would engage in territorial warfare over scarce resources, even resorting to cannibalism so they can live to see another day. This is the best case scenario, as everyone on Earth already expected World War III to take them out long before the next 50 years or even the next 5 years. The mission to terraform Mars was a desperate gamble for survival, but it was a chance. It was a small chance, but it was the only chance they had. They had to try. For the first time in history, all the world's governments agreed to put aside their differences, unclench their fists, and make a concerted effort to ensure that we all might have a future. The greatest minds of the world came together to breed a new species of plant that would be able to absorb the atmosphere of Mars and sustain themselves without rainfall, but also provide nourishment for the upcoming colonies who chose to live there. It would still be a miserable, depressing experience compared to Earth because there would be no grass or lakes, all drinking water would be recycled, and there would only be one thing to eat, but it was still a plan. Moving from Earth to Mars would feel like being evicted from a Hollywood mansion and being forced to live in a cheap motel, but anything was better than extinction. While Thomas floats in this particular point in space, resigning himself to the inexorable truth that he will die here, memories of the previous few hours flash in his mind in time with the still increasing heartbeat pounding through his body. The last conversation he had with Waylon replays like he's listening to his own eulogy. Waylon: Tom, I was wondering about something. What do you think will happen when we get to Mars? Thomas was sitting in the captain's chair performing routine maintenance on the shuttle's navigational operating system when Waylon asked him this question. It was an innocent-sounding question, but the answer seemed so obvious to Thomas that he wasn't even sure if it was worth answering. Out of politeness, he paused his activity and turned to face Waylon sitting in the co-pilot's chair. Both of them were securely strapped into their seats, as the zero-gravity environment would make sitting in a single spot practically impossible without a harness. Thomas: When we arrive on the Mars surface, that's when we plant these seeds and build these housing domes. Then we go back, and by the time we get there, the trees should be able to sustain life with their fruit on Mars, so the first colony should be able to live here. Waylon: I know, but I mean, what happens back on Earth? Do you think the global truce will end? Thomas: I can't say for sure. I would love to be optimistic and say that putting this plan into action is proof we can actually work together on things, but you can't really plan what people are going to do, especially when they're supposed to be enemies. They only really work together if they're threatened with something worse. Waylon: That's true. If you told me 10 years ago I'd be working with Americans to help save the world, I would think you were picking a fight with me, but here we are. Despite Waylon's smile as he made that remark, Thomas could feel a small bite behind those words. He couldn't quite place his finger on it, but perhaps it was his own guilt by association for being an American citizen himself. Thomas nervously laughed and thought of something more lighthearted to talk about in an attempt to bring some levity to the conversation. Well, I'm thinking about what's going to happen when we're done here too, Thomas began. And I really want to see my family again. My daughter will be about 13 by then. I'm thinking about how much I'm going to love taking her to middle school, even looking forward to the age when she starts hating me and thinking I'm just a cringe old boomer who doesn't understand memes anymore. Maybe I'll even bring back a cool-looking little rock from Mars if NASA lets me. They might. You never know. Thomas laughed a little. Waylon wordlessly nods, a smile of recollection in his eyes, thinking about his own family. Thomas continued, I'll get to see Rebecca again, probably bore her with all the details about space and all that. Well, maybe that's a little mean. She's a nerd who loves space too, but sometimes I think I go on a little too much when I talk about space, Mars, the cosmos, and all that. I don't think she's bored hearing about it, but maybe more like she just doesn't want my family was killed in one of your wars, you know. Waylon interrupted. Come again? Thomas queried, immediately concerned. I was at work. That's what they always say to do when your country's under attack. Go to work, keep calm and carry on, right? Just business as usual. Try not to think about it. That's what we civvies are supposed to do. Ignore the soldiers, ignore the sounds of bombs dropping all over your country. Just shove your head in the sand, civilian. So I was at my desk taking phone calls and filing paperwork when I got the phone call that my family was blown up by another one of your many bombings of civilian neighborhoods. I went home and there was my entire life, reduced to a hole in the ground. I couldn't even see bones. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say, Thomas replied with heartfelt sincerity. Well, what can I say? We were told to evacuate, but it's not like we really had anywhere to evacuate to, since the whole city could be a smoking crater the next day. Evacuation would have just made us feel slightly safer, but it wouldn't have really meant anything. No, we had no choice. Looking back, maybe I should have taken the chance and gone somewhere else. Don't worry, Thomas. I know you had nothing to do with it. I'm still sorry that happened to you. It must be so hard to carry that with you. What country are you from? I actually don't notice much of an accent. None of your fucking business, that's where I'm from. Thomas stiffened up, a little fear crawling up his back. And I don't have an accent because I was a language major and I could speak 5 languages with full fluency. It wasn't really that hard. Thomas scanned Waylon's face for indication of malice, and even though he couldn't find any malice in his face, his words still had an obvious edginess to them. In the few months spent on the rocket with Waylon, he never once heard him use foul language. Their conversations had always been about work, with only a few exceptions like talking about sports or personal hobbies. This was the first non-surface level conversation they ever had, and Thomas quickly realized there was a very good reason for that. He thought about saying something back, but also thought that might upset Waylon even further, who clearly had a lot on his mind. He may have taken it as an insult if he'd changed the subject to sports or work. With no more options, Thomas inhaled and said, 5 languages? Wow, that's very impressive. Yeah, impressive, Waylon answered with resignation in his voice. He paused, then unfastened his harness and moved away from his chair. I'm sorry if I brought the mood down, Tom. I just want you to know that I don't hold it against you. You're here for the same reason I am. We just want to give our people a chance. Exactly, Waylon, answered Thomas with relief. We're just here to give our people a chance. I think we can do this. We just have to try. Thomas returned to his computer maintenance task, the previous conversation giving him both a sense of discomfort, but also feeling a stronger bond with his crewmate for having shared such a personal moment with him. Waylon's words quietly made their way to the back of his mind to make room for computer maintenance to reach the forefront of his consciousness. It wasn't necessarily the most difficult task in the world, but it still required time and concentration, so he couldn't allow himself to be distracted by thoughts of home or other people's homes. Thomas didn't remember falling asleep, but he suddenly felt grogginess and the sensation of waking up, along with a dull soreness on top of his head. He was wearing his astronaut suit and being pulled by Waylon towards the airlock. He wasn't awake enough to speak, but Waylon felt the jolt of him awakening as he moved along the handrails of the shuttle and spoke into his walkie-talkie so Thomas could hear him in his helmet. I'm sorry, Thomas. I don't want to do this to you, but when I said I wanted to make a better world for our people, I don't think you understood what I meant by that. And no, this has nothing to do with you. Waylon hurled Thomas's semi-conscious body into the airlock and shut the door behind him while Thomas's mind still reeled into consciousness, alternating between delirium and blind panic. When I return to Earth and I tell the news about how the all-American Golden Boy was tragically lost in space because of a mechanical failure, and they reveal to the world that I personally laid the foundation for Mars to become our new future, maybe we'll give all these world powers a good reason to stop dropping bombs on us. What do you think, Thomas? Thomas could only think of one word. Wait! He shouted. Waylon couldn't hear him because he didn't have his earpiece on. Not that it would have mattered anyway. Nothing would have changed Waylon's mind. His decision was already made before he even set foot on the vessel all those months ago, but it was today that he decided to act upon his plan. I'm sorry that you have to be the one being sacrificed here. Like I said, this has nothing to do with you. You just happen to be the poor unlucky guy who was unfortunate enough to be on this shuttle with me. It could have been anyone. I wouldn't blame you for taking it personally, just like how sometimes you can wake up with a family in the morning and then go to sleep at night with a hole in the ground where they used to be. It just happens. I didn't take that personally when it happened to me. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time too, Thomas. Thomas watched with unimaginable horror behind the glass of his helmet as the door to the airlock opened and he was violently sucked into the vacuum of the final frontier. Waylon actually had been planning this for a long time. He covered his tracks very well, Thomas had to admit to himself. Not only was Thomas completely unaware of his plot, but he also made sure he was equipped with a full 8 hours of air supply to avoid suspicion from curious minds who may inspect the shuttle when it returns to Earth in 2 years and they investigate for any signs of foul play. Waylon could simply say Thomas went out for a spacewalk to inspect the shuttle's panels damage and his harness wasn't fastened securely. The initial shock of his involuntary exile from the ship leaves him and he slowly shifts from panic to desperation. Then desperation finally gives way to hopelessness. Thomas has finally accepted that his death is imminent, or perhaps already here, and his body needs only to catch up and finalize it. His life has already ended, the final page has been written, and he's simply experiencing his own death in real time. He feels nothing. No hope, no sadness, not even anger towards Waylon. Nothing. His body became acclimated to zero gravity months ago, but in this moment he feels especially weightless. It's as if he no longer exists. He is flesh occupying a point in space and nothing more. He feels no physical sensation. He can't even feel his own heartbeat anymore. Is he dead? He considers the fact he's even able to question his own vitality as a sign that he is alive at all. Cogito ergo sum. Despite the empty feeling in his mind, the loss of all hope for experiencing anything ever again, he holds one thing. He is still alive. The only light left comes from the billions of distant stars and planets scattered along the vastness of the deep, dark cosmos. Despite his inescapable demise, he still could not ignore the stunning realization that this was truly a beautiful, once-in-a-lifetime sight. He actually never saw the stars with such clarity before. The Earth's atmosphere, even under the best of circumstances, never allowed for him to catch a full view of the distant celestial bodies. This time, he finally had a full, unrestricted view of them. He allowed himself to finally relax, open his eyes, and take a good long look at the world around him. Greenish nebula fade into billions of reddish stars, growing and shrinking with soft, comforting light in every direction. Thomas is surrounded by 360 degrees of beauty that no painter or photographer could ever capture. The stars were alive all around him, their soft light accentuated against the blackness of the void behind them. Dark matter, nebula, smudges of color. Thomas saw it all for the first time with his naked eyes. Breathtaking doesn't even describe it. He forgets everything in his entire life and drinks this moment like a man who spent his entire life crawling through burning sand would drink from a fountain of crystal clear Arctic water. The blackness of space now seems minuscule against the brilliant, ethereal light show that is being put on for him. He is the sole member of the audience, given a front row seat to a display of otherworldly luminescence being put on exclusively for him. He only has 7 more hours of oxygen remaining in his suit, but for the first time since his ejection, he actually feels something resembling appreciation for being given the chance to witness such rarely seen beauty. He thinks about the trillions of people who lived and died without ever seeing something like this. His focus shifts from blackness and emptiness to the dazzling sea of light all around him. all the colors of the spectrum twinkling and fading at once, singing to him like God's own chorus. This starry world isn't something to be afraid of anymore. This isn't his prison, Thomas thinks. This isn't his punishment. This isn't his execution. But this is his reward. He feels gratitude towards Wayland for this wondrous experience. For in this moment, Thomas is a king, and this universe of light is his kingdom. Thomas would willingly die 1,000 more times to spend one more minute gazing upon the world before him, and he is still fortunate enough to have 7 more hours to bask in the magical wonder of this euphoric realm of light before he passes on to the next world. Endorphins and dopamine flood Thomas's system, putting him in a state of wild ecstasy. He is in love with the world and everything in it. The birds, the sun, the grass, the animals. He loves the oceans, the mountains, and the valleys. He loves the clouds, the rain, and even the street that his house is on. He loves his wife, he loves his daughter, he loves his family. His thoughts turn to cherished memories he spent with his family. He remembered the first time his daughter made him an ashtray in art class, even though he doesn't smoke, and how embarrassed she was of it, and how proud he was to see it was made with her 2 little hands. He remembered the first time he cooked lasagna for dinner and set off the smoke alarm, so they all settled on ordering pizza and watching the never-ending story. He remembers the first time he met his wife when they were both in college, when she tutored him in physics and he helped her with world history. Each star he gazes upon triggers another memory. Pushing his daughter on the swing in the winter, his wife staying up all night grading science reports while he checked in and offered cups of coffee and encouragement, taking the whole family to see Muppets on Ice. Memory after memory, hundreds of them, thousands of them all at once. He loves his family. He misses his family. He really misses his family. What Thomas does next is something he never expected he would ever do in his life. He prays. He didn't believe in God up to this point, but in those stars, he feels like he is meeting with something even bigger, more powerful, more awe-inspiring. It may not be God, but it's something larger than he ever experienced. Something that gives him a greater sense of peace than all the gods combined. Whatever is in those stars, it couldn't hurt to ask them for help. He can try. If it gives him even a shred of a chance to see his beloved family again, it's worth trying. It's an infinitely small chance, but it's still a chance, and it's better than no chance. Thomas clenches his hands and prays to the stars. If you're listening, bring me to them. Whatever you have to do, however it happens, please bring me to them. Just let me see them again. I'll do anything you want. If I can see them for even 5 minutes, for even a second, I just want you to bring me to them. Thomas repeats these words for as long as the air in his suit allows him to. He shouts them into space, into the stars, until his throat no longer works and his mouth runs dry. He slowly begins to feel dizzy from the depleting air supply. His words slow down along with his heartbeat. His eyes start involuntarily closing. Then he feels the sensation of a hand shaking his left arm, a small, feminine hand with pointy fingernails. He opens his eyes to find himself sitting on an airplane. He is no longer wearing a suit, but a gray t-shirt with the 9 Inch Nails logo and tan khakis. Still trying to make sense of his surroundings, he checks his pockets. Car keys, wallet, airline ticket. The airline ticket is for Coyote Airlines Flight 109, round trip from Pennsylvania to Los Angeles. Still being shaken by the left arm, he turns to the source of his shaking. It's his wife, Rebecca. She looks at him with an expression that is simultaneously sad and terrified, but with a small hint of relief to see Thomas awake there with her. Thomas, you're awake. Oh my God, there was a mid-air collision and the plane is going to crash. There's nothing anyone can do. We're going to die. She clutches him tightly. To his right, his daughter Emily is burying her head in her arms, preparing for impact. She doesn't want to see it coming. She just wants it to be over. She had pink headphones on over her blonde hair and her eyes were shut tightly. Thomas holds her head in his chest. On the way down, he thinks back to the last few months, the real last few months. He was never an astronaut. He was a car salesman who was taking his family on vacation for spring break because his dealership outsold the other dealers in the region and the employees were given an all-expense-paid trip to Hollywood. There never was a Wayland or a plan to save the human race from extinction. It was all a dream. It only felt like he spent months on that vessel because the human brain is exceptionally skilled at convincing itself of absolutely anything. The only part of that dream that was real at all was his family. Thomas understands now why he dreamed he was in space. The plane was in free fall from the time he started dreaming, so he felt like he was floating in zero gravity the whole time. The dream itself may have only lasted for less than a minute in the real world, but it truly felt to him like he was up there for months. The weightless feeling persists into his current awakened state as the plane falls. He holds his family close and kisses Rebecca and Emily on their heads. He doesn't care what happens now. They're here for him and he's here for them. Together in their final moments, no one will die alone today. Thomas smiles as the ground rushes up to meet him. The end.